Well, welcome, everybody, to another episode of Winging It on the Community Cloudcast. I'm your host, Eric Shupps, along with my fellow host, Robert Bogue.
I think that is partner in crime to you.
Yeah, names changed to protect the guilty.
Yes, exactly.
So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Been a couple-month hiatus for us here, but we are back in the saddle again with yet another exciting, thrilling episode.
I can't remember.
I know everyone is excited.
That comes true. Like, I can't remember which cartoon, right? Like, it's back with another exciting episode. So, yeah. No, but we're going to have a lot of fun because we're going to talk about AI.
We are going to talk about AI. So, generally speaking, you can find new episodes every second Thursday or so. Like I said, we've had a couple months off, but we'll try and get back on a regular schedule for our releases on YouTube, Facebook, and I'm missing up here the SoundCloud link to the podcast, but you can also check us out on all your favorite cloud or your podcast platforms, from Apple to Google to Amazon and SoundCloud, all of the above. You can find us. Thank our sponsors, of course, Aptigent and Power Tools, which you can find on Power Platform, Nintex, IBM, Salesforce, and other platforms. No new updates at the moment. Have some cool stuff coming that we can't talk about yet. But, very top secret. Will be happening soon. So
it's secret squirrel stuff.
It's secret squirrel. Rob, what's new in the world of change management?
Things keep changing, like every day. It keeps things changing.
And it's all about how you manage them.
And it is, in fact, all about how you manage it. No, actually, we have some new models are up, and there's always new book reviews, and there's always cool stuff coming. And invite people to come learn about change management, learn about how to talk to people, being empathetic. Only if you want to, though.
Only if you want to.
Yeah.
Unless required by your company's training department.
We're not telling them it exists.
We want to welcome on our newest sponsor, North American Cloud and Collaboration Summit, which is coming to you from the Irving, Texas area. For those of you who aren't familiar with the DFW Metroplex, that's pretty much smack dab in between Dallas and Fort Worth, near the DFW International Airport, happening at the Irving Convention Center, which is probably the strangest building in Dallas-Fort Worth, and you absolutely cannot miss it.
And you're showing a picture of the bomb suspended on a tower. And you're telling me the other buildings are crazier.
The other building's even stranger.
And he's right.
So that registration is now open. Call for speakers closes in the next few days. We'll start posting sessions and whatnot here in the next few weeks. We already have a lot of great content to bring your way. One of the big things that we're bringing to this conference now is it's a multi-cloud. So we'll have Salesforce. We've got quite a few Salesforce sessions already. You'll see those being announced very quickly. OpenAI, Azure, AWS, Google. We're going to have all kinds of stuff for you. So 3 days, April 9th through 11th, 2024. And it's going to be a great time. So jump on there now, get in on the early bird discounts, and get your tickets because we will sell out.
Yeah.
All right. So this month's topic, probably the thing that everybody is talking about one way or another, is preparing your organization for artificial intelligence. And why did I choose this particular aircraft picture, Rob? Because it's going to happen whether you want it to or not.
So for those of you playing the home game, this is the B-2, also known as a flying wing. It is one of those stealth aircraft, and everybody went, what? Are you sure you really want to do that?
And I picked a stealth aircraft because in many organizations, AI is sneaking in by stealth, and it's going to be an unstoppable force, whether IT or the business wants it or not. It's going to happen. And we want to talk about how to be properly prepared for that within your organization, regardless of size. It doesn't matter if you're a big multinational or a small to medium-sized business. AI is coming, and you may not see it coming, just like a B2, but when it shows up, you'll know it.
Knock, knock. Land shark. No. Me too.
Me too. Funnily enough, I remember watching a lot of the early trials of these where I used to live out in California, and my dad worked on the various programs around the whole stealth thing, and seeing the iteration of how they solved the design challenges of making what essentially is a YF-12 actually fly, which this design has been around forever. Funnily enough, I know I'm digressing, but for those of you who are Marvel fans and have watched the first Captain America movie, the flying wing design with all the propellers in the back was actually a real design that they actually flew. They just could never get it to stabilize enough because it's basically an unstable flight platform that wants to act like a boomerang and spin around. But
yeah, no, totally. There's some really cool things that as electronics and AI have grown up, they've made it possible for us to do these aircraft that are dynamically unstable. It's like sitting on the top of a ball. They don't want to keep doing what they're doing. They're like, no, I want to go left, right, up, down, whatever. And the computers are fast enough now to detect changes and kind of keep us in line. So.
Indeed. So, well, let's talk about AI here. So, first of all, I guess we should really talk about what AI is, because there's a lot of miscommunication around out there. These days, everyone is talking about generative AI, which are large language models that allow you to talk to the computer and get an intelligence response. But Rob, as we both know, that's just scratching the surface of all the various things that AI is and that it can do.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I start this with folks, I try to help people understand that AI is not new, right? We were just talking about it sort of in the context of aircraft, but also probably the oldest implementation of AI that I can remember seeing in widespread adoption is OCR, optical character recognition. That truly is the same statistical machine learning. It's the same stuff. Now it's decades old. But this has been with us, and we're now starting to see some new and interesting applications, as you just said, Eric.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting how this sort of all exploded at once when the technology it's based on, as you mentioned, has been around for quite a while. I mean, we've been doing ML stuff for forever. The language model stuff has been around for quite a while. Sure, their recent enhancements have made it easier, but what's really caused the whole thing to explode is the power of the cloud, the ability to scale out at the massive scale that these language models need, and the ability to do the speech processing and whatnot. And as we can see, I just went out and grabbed a few slides to kind of get a feel of what people are thinking and where they are at now. That there are folks out there that, at least in the surveys, are responding and saying, yes, we use AI, some sort of AI, typically generative, but we use it in our daily work process, or we're starting to use it, or a lot of people even saying that they're using it outside of work. So people are adopting this, whether there's a coordinated push forward or not, it's happening.
Yeah, I actually, when I first saw this, I thought this was a pot chart where pot's being used. I'm like, that's a weird one. Why'd you put that in there? But also the same with AI, right? Like, it's widely, they tried it once, right? They didn't inhale. Yeah, like there's just very few people who don't have any exposure to it yet. But also, like, the number of people that are really using it, right? And even the people in the darker blues, right? Like, are they really getting yield out of it, value out of it, or are they just really trying to figure it out, right? Like, and I
think that's where we are on the continuum cycle right now. We're in the hype phase still, obviously. So people are just playing with it and trying to figure out what it can do for them. Microsoft, to their credit, has gotten pretty far out in front of this with their Copilot release, and have beat most of the major players to the market. And of course, they have the advantage of a different take on generative AI that is actually very useful in the corporate context, which we've talked about before. And that is because they have access to a corpus of your data, structured and unstructured. they can actually produce things that are relevant to what you're doing. Whereas things like ChatGPT are very context ignorant and don't really know what it is you're trying to do when you're talking to the model.
Right. But right. And it's that context that is super important. We learned that, was it 2 decades ago with search, right? Like knowing where the person is and starting to shape search results based on the person's context really, really matters. And then of course, about a decade later or a decade ago or whatever it is, Delve came along, which is, window dressing on this social network graph. So not only understanding you and your context, but also starting to understand how you interact and relate to other people. And I think that's actually the super amazing piece about Copilot, is beginning to leverage these learnings over decades about how do we make the tools more useful.
Yeah, you bring up Delve, which is an interesting point, because in many ways it was ahead of its time for what Microsoft was trying to do. And it received a tremendous amount of pushback from users, because it suddenly exposed how poor their content management structures were, and their security structures or permissioning structures inside the organization. And I have a feeling that Copilot is going to be that times 1,000. Right.
Well, what's going to happen is you're going to ask Copilot a question, or other tools, but Copilot in particular, you're going to ask a question like, "Hey, what's the CEO's salary?" And it may tell you, right? Like, you don't have to go looking for it. You don't have to dig through the spreadsheet that somebody accidentally set the permissions wrong. It's like, oh, here's your information. And you're like, well, that was really good, but also really spooky, because you shouldn't see that. You shouldn't know that. And that was the exact same thing we got. And again, 2 decades ago, we got it with search, right? People are like, what do you mean you can see that? Like, it's in a directory that nobody knows about. I'm like, search will take care of that for you. And then we get Delve, right? And then these relationships and things that start to get exposed. Now you ask Copilot, hey, some question that it shouldn't know the answer for, but probably does. And then the question becomes, will it tell you? Right.
Well, and for most people, the answer is yes, because they haven't done the basics that they need to do to secure that information. So this all goes back to what Rob and I have been talking about for years, and that is metadata and taxonomy, and getting your content types structured, structuring your data, and properly applying a permission model around that data. Because if you don't have those things, in the past, search exposed a lot of that if you were using it and if you knew how to use it. But AI now, especially the copilots, are making it so easy to get at that information, which is kind of the point. But it's exposing that people are not, in fact, prepared.
Right. Yeah. And when we talk about readiness, certainly this conversation, whether we want to call it information architectures, we're calling it information governance, as it's been rebranded, because all things get rebranded, and permissions and security and all that stuff. And that's one huge block. And I think observationally we've seen that most organizations don't do it well. Some do it okay. Many do it poorly. And then there's the other side of it, which is the people side of it, right? And it's the people side of it, which I don't expect we'll spend much time on today, but the people side of it is the guy that started with punch cards is probably not your best pick for AI in general. Just saying, right? Like, I'm not being discriminatory. I'm just saying punch cards and AI are pretty different. And if you are trying to take an elderly workforce, a wise workforce, and get them to really take advantage of AI, it's very likely to spook them. So let me pick an industry that's safe, because it's well known that the energy industry has lots of really ready for retirement people. And so when you bring into an environment like that AI, you not only have to deal with the technical aspects and the permissions and all that stuff, you also have to deal with the fact that Joe wants to retire next year, and he doesn't want to do anything or learn anything or have any changes that mean that he could lose his job before he hits his magical number in his 401k, right? And so I think it's twin issues, right? And certainly, Eric, I mean, you and I have talked about getting metadata on files. I mean, I was talking about decades. That's sort of how we measure now, is in decades, right? But how would you say people are doing at getting appropriate metadata on, even a majority of their files?
Oh, they're not even approaching a majority. I would argue they're not even approaching a minority.
I would agree.
And despite having a richness of tools at their disposal, they have you have syntax. It's there, right? Okay. Does it need to be trained with good models? Of course it does. There is no such thing yet as just some magical AI that's going to go out and scan all your documents and magically produce content types and models for all that. It still has to be trained, but it's leaps and bounds ahead of where search and delve were a decade ago.
Right.
And that tooling enables you to crunch massive amounts of very similar data, which most organizations have, right, into a relatively manageable number of models that don't take years to create. I think that there continues to be a lack of understanding of the importance of structuring that data. A lack of budget, obviously, because if you don't understand the importance, you're not going to allocate budget to it to solve these problems. And I suspect a lot of people are going to get blindsided when they turn on Copilot and see how poorly structured their data in the organization is, and they're going to freak out and turn it off. Whereas if they just put a little bit of effort into preparing, they could have been ready for that.
Right. Yeah, I think, I don't know. Will they turn it off? I don't know. I will say that it's very easy to turn off a user to new technology if it doesn't solve their problem. And even with AI, I've had to take several runs at it because I would try and give it a problem it can't solve. Right? It's just poor at solving, whether it's the particular model or it's whatever. Right? And you have to it takes a little bit of work to figure out, oh, well, it can do this, right? It will do this just fine. But it looks like you've got more data.
Well, maybe. What I was trying to get at is to find out what sort of job functions and whatnot are actually engaging with this. And to no surprise, marketing and sales, obviously leading the pack. They're very text-driven and image-driven. They produce a lot of documents of various different kinds, and so it would be natural for them to have to find new ways to phrase things and get things out very quickly. So I'm not surprised by that. I'm not sure where personalized marketing falls into all of this in terms of AI. Maybe crafting messages that speak to particular functions.
It's dumping SEO garbage onto the internet so that we can all have to wade through a whole bunch of stuff to find the thing we want.
Ah, lucky us.
Yeah, sorry. That was the cynic in me in a positive way.
I do think that when we're speaking in terms of a Copilot type of AI, and bear in mind, this isn't specific to Microsoft. Salesforce will be coming out with their version of a Copilot. I'm sure Google is working on it over there as well. That will help with what we're seeing as the initial use cases that are reflected here in some of this data, which is, crafting first drafts of documents or summarizing text in documents and putting things together, bringing multiple documents together, creating a PowerPoint presentation out of, a 30-page Word document. I think those are obvious areas where we're going to get initial traction, not to mention really useful sort of painless stuff like the cool things they're doing in Teams, summarizing a meeting, right? Doing a quick rewind of a meeting. Those are very cool things that don't necessarily require that you do some sort of preparation. And I think that's reflected in the use cases we're seeing now in these charts is people are doing things that don't require a lot of prep.
Right.
But it won't be long before they go beyond that and they get into the more complex things.
Well, and the things that honestly provide more value, right? Like, it's cool that it summarizes a meeting. Totally watched it do it. Super neat. But there are things that it's not good at, and there are things that it's better at when it is supported properly. And I don't mean just trained, but supported properly. And so now we're in the situation where, people are going to get excited, right? We'll cross over the hype into the trough of expectations, right? And I think what you and I are collectively saying is, if you get the information architecture, information governance right, the dip may not be as much as you think it is, right? Like, you can start to take advantage of the really advanced sorts of things that it can do. You mentioned, creating PowerPoints and creating Word documents, and in general, it's really good at summarizing. It, by the way, can't count. Just in case you're wondering, if you say, "Hey, write me a 2,000 word thing," it has no idea. Right? It's like, I'm like, really? Like, this is all based on math, and you can't count. But then again,
Well, so that's an important point, and an inflection point I think is coming, if not next year, the year after, and that is that trough of expectations, where we're going to get over the hype of doing these initial cool, simple things, and then we're going to get into, okay, we actually have to get some work done here.
Right.
And that's where it kind of starts to fall apart, because that getting work done requires that you have the Lego pieces in place to build that structure on. And what we're really saying here is, if you want to shallow that trough out, keep it at a very usable level, and make that investment, because it's not cheap, pay off for you, you're going to have to put some extra effort in now while we're in the hype cycle. If you can't say with confidence that a majority of your usable documentation, I'm not talking about archive stuff from 10 years ago, usable documentation that's accessed frequently, is properly tagged and has metadata, and that you have policies in place and labeling. And if you can't say that with confidence, that you've done some proper ECM, that trough is going to be deep.
Yeah. Well, and so the other thing, and I don't mean to spook people, but I'm going to. So think about this now. Like, right now, you have all these meetings, and they're not really recorded. And if they are recorded, they go away really quickly. But you now have AI-generated summaries, which are more detailed than any note-taking that has ever been done, any meeting minutes, right? They're way more detailed than that. And so now you have these records about meetings that suddenly are going to persist for a very long time with a high degree of richness, or a moderate degree of richness, to be fair. That's all discoverable, right? And so how do you deal with the stuff it generates that you don't want to stick around to your normal retention schedules? Right? Like what about the stuff you don't want hanging around? And sure, you shouldn't be talking about it in the first place, right? But this extra content that we're going to now start carrying.
I think people do need to be probably frightened to death about that, especially in regulated industries, because it is part and parcel of any corporate process to discuss in a meeting, disposition of sensitive information, right? If you have a meeting to talk about destroying those tax returns that are 8 years old, the tax return may go away, but that conversation you had about it last week now becomes discoverable. Right.
And so you may accidentally hold on to core bits of information you shouldn't have. Right.
Mm-hmm. And how do you secure what we would call highly unstructured sensitive information? Meeting minutes being primary amongst those, right? You have a meeting to talk about a disciplinary action for an employee.
Right.
That's highly sensitive.
Right.
Or or you have a Teams call with HR to talk about, some highly personal issue, and Copilot is creating a summary of that meeting. Where does it get put? Who's going to find it?
Right. What's really so what I will say is really cool is because we've been doing this for decades, because we've got iterations. Many of these roads have already been crossed at Microsoft. And so let me give you an example. So Delve, when it first was coming out, and they're talking about, so the way that Delve works, I have to do this piece. So there are signals that can convert it to edges, right? And so a signal is, I opened a document, I was in a meeting with someone, those sorts of things. And then from that, it builds relationships. And there was a real concern when this technology was first being released. Well, what kinds of events generate those connections? And so, for instance, the one that was a prototypical example was, I'm reading the employee assistance program on the intranet, right? Because I've got depression or whatever the assumption is, right? Do I end up building some sort of a relationship with the author of that document? And or is that context that it's about a depression, is that recorded? Because the other thing Delve was doing was it was kind of pushing through your activity and your network and all these things and surfacing stuff, right? So if I'm looking at the EAP program, I don't want my boss knowing about that necessarily. Certainly not my peers or my subordinates, right? Like, how are the things filtered? And I think for the social network piece of it, Microsoft ended in a pretty good space. By the way, that was round 2 for social for them. So maybe the first one didn't end so well, but at least they figured it out for Delve. Or the original graph, just so we're clear, Microsoft reused the word graph. It used to be for social network graph. But I think that's things that, for instance, for Copilot, they're going to have to figure out is, how does Copilot know what sensitivity and what access to assign to its answers, the things that it has generated based on information that could, but isn't always confidential? And it's not
what
easy.
Levers of control are provided for that.
Right. Yeah, that's actually the other thing at the surface level as a consumer. We think about it's a black box and it just does its magic, but there's a lot of little mini tweaks and turns and levers, just like there was for search, and just like there's all this other stuff.
So to the theme of preparing an organization for this adoption, which is obviously coming. 3 areas, I'm not sure these are the primary 3 areas, but they're certainly up there around organization and operating model. I think that's mostly what we've been focusing around here is, do you have your content properly structured? Is it properly permissioned? And there's another area that I think people are glossing over where they think, we have all the right permissions in place. Do you really? Because I'm going to say you probably don't. You may think you do because it hasn't been exposed, but now that it's exposed at a massive scale, I suspect you don't really have the permissions properly done. Especially when you are, say, in a Teams-driven environment and you're just ad hoc spinning these things up in Teams and adding members and admins, and it's creating all the SharePoint stuff on the back end that you're not paying attention to. Right. And so there's a fair amount of assessment, I think, that is involved in determining if you have the right structures in place, if the content is properly secured, and if it's properly sensitive information is properly being, redacted or flagged or noted, a la, labeling and sensitivity.
Right.
And then the other pillars here, I'll let you talk on the last one, culture and change, because you obviously know more about that than I do. But I think from a talent and skills perspective, there are some concerns. You brought it up already about an aging workforce. Certainly an issue trying to upskill on these new technologies, but that fear that AI is going to take my job and the resistance to any sort of AI model because of the people are worried that it's going to take their job. Well, computers were going to take everybody's job too, right? Robots were going to take
robots. Yeah. There weren't going to be any manufacturing jobs left because And I saw iRobot, and I know how it ends. I'm not sure.
Not to discount those concerns. I mean, the cloud was going to take everybody's job too, right?
Yeah.
And not to discount that they're saying there are no valid concerns there are, but I think what we're really looking at least in the near term horizon, is when we talk about skilling, is how to adapt your work processes to the new tool sets that are available. Right? Not necessarily, I have to go learn how to dig ditches because, I used to write a technical writer. Now I'm out of a job.
Right. So I think, so let me build on that for a second. So first of all, there is this concept of human capital and learning and reskilling, and there is that. We were talking about robots. I can tell you that in the United States, we lost roughly 30% of our manufacturing jobs. Mostly, our manufacturing, blue collar, union labor, we lost over a couple of decades. And that's bad, right? No question, that's bad. But also, at the same time, we were getting better, higher skilled, less taxing, less hazardous, right? So it isn't about are we losing jobs overall? It's about how do we get people in the right places. Certainly, we use the example of very old people who are ready for retirement. They may not be the first choice to reskill, right? Like that just may be not the right thing. But as we look more broadly, we have unemployment rates that are some of the lowest that we've seen in recorded history. It's certainly in the last 50 years, right? We're seeing a labor shortage in the United States and the baby boom. We know that we're going to run out of labor, right? And so as we start to talk about, I don't want to lose my job to AI, it's like, no, really, you can have a job. It's just the job you have won't be something that AI could do quicker, faster, better. And we just got to figure out what those are so that we skill you up in that. Right. I don't know about you, but I've seen people using AI to generate code, and I'm like, like Skynet, here we come. But I think there are jobs that are not going to be replaced by AI. And I do think developers are like we've said that developers are going to lose their job because they're going to have this no code thing, and then JavaScript was going to kill it, and whatever, right? How do we help people focus on if you could do anything you want to do, what would you do, right? And then what are the barriers, and how do you get past them, and how does it generate value for both you and the organization?
Well, I think some of that is organization led, and companies have to understand and finally come to the realization, which they've pushed back against for decades and decades, of constant skill training in their organization. Like everybody needs to constantly be upskilling in these. Companies hate that because they don't want to invest in training ever, and they want to put people in one slot and make no investment in that resource. And that is, things are moving too fast. That's not reasonable anymore. It was never reasonable to begin with, let's be fair. But I think that some of that change has to come from an organizational level of accepting that constant reskilling and training is now part of the work acumen. Like some amount every work week has to be dedicated to new skills acquisition.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so to be fair, organizations are responding to an industry that has done an absolutely wretchedly bad job. And I say, so first of all, I speak at Association of Talent Development conferences, and I speak at the Society for Human Resource Management conferences. I need to put this disclaimer out there. So when I just completely bash training and the way that we do it, and like I'm in the bucket, right? Like, we do an absolutely horrible job at it as an industry. We don't teach people the way that they need to learn. We give them these annoying click-through sexual harassment training. We really should stop teaching people how to do that. And like, we give them this stuff that's just awful, right? And we expect that that's skills building and that's learning, and they're gonna and it isn't. It doesn't work. We rarely measure outcomes. Certainly, there's a lot on that. So I think you're right. I think we've got to get to this continuous learning culture, building the learning organization. Peter Senge was talking about that just a few decades ago. We've got to get there. A part of it, I think, is the organizations changing their mindset. And part of it is, like I say, I think the industry, the training industry, has got to get their head out of their orifice and start to do a better job of giving people what they need. I mean, you and I both have worked on productivity aids and support. And, sometimes you got to kind of like dump it in their head. They have to know it. And sometimes you have to make it easy for them to get the supports they need. And we don't understand that either. So I think we've got to get to this. We've got to figure out how to get organizations to shift their thinking to how do we help people be more productive? And that may be that we're doing continuous training, that it's 4 hours a week or 8 hours a week. And that's just the thing.
Well, there's some hope that some of these AI tools can improve the way training is built and delivered, generated, and
we hope
consumed, which we can certainly hope. But this part of this is the last pillar here, which is culture and change. I mean, an organization that doesn't have a learning mindset, that doesn't have a mindset of skilling their users, is going to be way behind the 8 ball from the AI train that's about to hit them, and may never recover. The industries that I think will suffer the most are those that don't have a change culture that can manage the speed at which this massive shift is coming at them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, for a few decades we used the word agility. We've talked about things like digital transformation, blah, 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 right? Like, it's just words. What we need to do is figure out, how do we help people make changes? How do we help organizations make changes? And how does it become a natural part of it? The challenge really is organizations, by their very nature, are designed to resist change. They need that to hold their own structure, to keep them just blowing up. But I don't know that, I know that it's difficult for organizations to turn the dials so that they are starting to move faster, that they're starting to accept and integrate change faster. And there's a little bit of shift there, right? Like, so I said accept, but also integrate, right? And even further on that continuum is engage with, right? How do you get people that are yearning to, I need this latest new utility, I need this new thing, versus, oh my gosh, they moved my cheese again.
And how, and this probably applies to a lot of people, if you're in an organization that resistant to change, probably most of them, how does the average person in an organization, knowing that these big things are coming, how can they be reasonably prepared, or get the message of preparedness up the stack that the organization will take recognition? Is there anything that regular folks like us can do?
How do you help the organization learn to adopt change quicker?
How do you start to create that culture if it's not being recognized by management?
Small wins, right? Do something small that is a change, get it executed effectively. You build reputation. Oh, well, they can get change done, and then eventually they're handing you really, really big changes. And that's super easy to say, right? Like, that's sort of the quick quip. But it's truth, which is, how do you learn how to manage the little and do it well so that you can get the bigger? There's a joke. Okay, so if you have a task, right, and there are a bunch of people in the office, who do you give the task to? the person who's bored, sitting alone, doing nothing, or the person who is so busy they can barely see straight, right? And the answer is the person who's the busiest. And you're like, wait a minute, that's completely wrong. No, because they're busy because they're getting stuff done. Mm-hmm. The person who's sitting there is not doing anything. And we don't know if that's because they can't get anything done or they've already done the stuff they had, right? And how do you demonstrate that you can communicate clearly, that you can help articulate the value, what it's going to do for them? How do you demonstrate that so that the organization starts coming to you when it wants more of it? Right? And I think you and I we've both seen this. You deliver a successful project, and then they're like, "Hey, can you also do?" And we're like, yeah, it's not core. It's this is not what we do, but they're like, yeah, but you've done so well in these things and you know how to do the change and blah, blah. We want you to, do things you're just not comfortable with. Like I'm doing a fax project right now, right? The 90s have called and I am coming. And I'm very clear with the client. This is not my wheelhouse, right? This is not a place where I have a ton of expertise. And they're like, yes, but we know if we hand it to you and your team, it'll get done. And I'm like, well, that is true. Like, I can't argue that point. They're like, just make it happen, right? Because that's the thing that matters is we got to get to the end point. We got to get to the result. So that's how we do it.
So let's talk a little bit about risk management because there be dragons, lots of big gnarly ones. And there's lots of risk in this whole AI adoption journey, some of which we probably haven't even envisioned yet, that are coming down the pike. And that has to be managed. And of course, this is probably the first pushback of adoption as well. There's too much risk. Okay, but risk is something, it always exists. It just has to be managed.
Right.
So what are those risks? This is just a smattering of things that invoke risk, but there's some pretty significant ones in here, right? Leaks of proprietary data and infringement. And I would say, exposing sensitive information. That there could be 100 things on the slide. So how do, in terms of preparation, how do organizations start to approach this risk model and get their heads around what they can do to mitigate some of these upcoming risks?
Well, first, I think we've got to be. I think we've got to acknowledge the elephant in the room that most organizations don't do the baseline of risk management well. Certainly, IT sec, IT security, they don't do it well. It's underfunded, it's under recognized, and that's shifting, right? But what we have to look at is the sophistication. If I just pick the one in the lower left corner, the sophistication of phishing and fraud, right? A decade ago, phishing didn't happen very frequently. Today, every large organization is bombarded with it. And it's only going to get better. This one is an interesting one because actually people say, well, why is it that they misspelled the word bank or Nigeria or whatever it is, right? And the answer is they did it intentionally because if you're paying enough attention to notice that, they don't want you going further. Right? Because you're going to stop and you'll report and you'll do the things and so they're intentionally introducing errors. So I think some of this stuff, it appears like AI would make it really, really gnarly. But if you really look at the dynamics that are functioning internally, it won't. I think some of the things are the same as humans, biased outputs, right? Honestly, so I rarely give Microsoft marketing kudos, rarely. But naming their AI Copilot, brilliant, because it means you're still in control, you're still the pilot, you're still responsible. So when you look at something like biased outputs, right, you as an individual and as an organization are still in control. and you should be looking for these things, right? That's your job. Copyright infringement. So I think externally AI has this as a problem, and I don't think there's a good solution to it. It will be interesting to see how the courts rule on this, both in the U.S. and in EMEA. Really interested in that. Most of APAC doesn't believe in copyright, so it's not such a big deal there. but EMEA and America are both going to have problems, because how do you signal to the AI that it cannot use your content? And you and I both know that there's a robots.txt file on all the websites that nobody ever sees, but it says what crawlers can do. And I think we're going to end up with some signal to tell AI what it can and cannot do with your content. And it'll be semi-structured like robots.txt. And until we get that, I think it's just a mess. But I also don't think people are going to get sued over it. So I think if I shouldn't say that. I expect that the language, the AI companies may, but individual organizations using the technology are unlikely to.
Unless they're big enough, perhaps. But
Right.
you bring up a good point of distinguishing between internal and external content, because internal content is owned by the organization anyway.
Right.
It's are you like the infamous issues at Microsoft? Well, tell me how to fix the code. Don't show me how to fix the code, because I can't look at your code, right? Because then that would be infringing, and we have to do it ourselves. So tell me how you did it, but don't show me how you did it. Which you're just having to walk that tightrope between, and sometimes maybe going a little bit too far one direction or the other. But that external content, I think, poses the bigger risk, and we're talking about preparation for AI, at least from an enterprise perspective. That's less of a risk there, I think, than leaking proprietary data and it filtering outside of your organization, and potentially things escaping the corporate net that shouldn't be.
Right, and the starting point there is how many organizations have DLP set up, right? How many people have digital loss protection, digital leakage protection set up, that they know when something shouldn't have been sent, right? And most organizations that I am aware of, certainly in the mid-size scale and lower, don't often have that set up. They don't have it set up to block credit cards and social security numbers and other identifiers that shouldn't be transmitted in an unsecure form.
Yeah, that's certainly the case. And those are some of the areas that have to be looked at, I think, in the preparedness journey. Do you have those controls in place? Because most people, as you say, don't, or they may have some, but they're not sufficient.
Well, yeah, there's certainly not generally sophisticated and not sufficient. Because we've upped the game, we've increased the velocity yet again.
Yeah, indeed. So talking to customers, right, who are now on this journey of at least accepting that AI is coming and that something needs to be done inside of their organizations, right, to deal with it. What are some things that you're hearing from customers, or even that you're possibly telling customers in terms of, hey, look, these are the things you need to be doing today that can have an impact? Understand you may not adopt this tomorrow or next week or next month, but what are you doing now? Where are people's heads at from the folks that you've been talking to?
I think we've been on this long journey towards this thing that people like to call information governance, which is inclusive of the information architecture, which is the metadata and taxonomies in the organization, permissions and the DLP and I think information governance is hard because it takes a lot of work. It involves a lot of people, and not a lot of people really understand what it means exactly. but the components of information governance are the things that I see clients starting to shore up because they can start to see where there is a wave coming. And whether that's defining a taxonomy that works across the organization or metadata standards or, whatever it is, those are the things that I'm seeing.
Well, as always, a lot of ground covered in a short period of time. We could talk about this a lot more, and we probably will, no doubt, be talking about this a lot more over the coming weeks and months and even years as the impetus builds for adoption. In fact, speaking of the upcoming North American Collaboration Summit, we have a number of sessions on AI at the summit coming up. And so people can learn more about it, certainly there. And so do get registered for that so you can join us and learn more from folks who have lots of different perspectives. I know Rob's going to be there speaking on this very topic, as a matter of fact. So please do come and join us in April and talk about this and many other subjects as well. I want to thank our sponsors, Aptogent and Thor Projects, of course. And that is all that we have for this month. Rob, any closing thoughts?
I think, as people have questions and concerns, as they're talking about, is my organization ready? Definitely reach out to us, right? Like we'd love to get some more takes on that and the things that they're most worried about. Because I think it is an evolving space, and the more that we can get signals and information from folks, the better off we'll all be.
Yeah, and at some point, perhaps it's even feasible to start to put together a roadmap for organizations, right?
Yep.
To help them, what are the top 10 things you need to be concerned about, and here's how we can help you, solve those particular areas. I think we've got a fairly decent handle around that now, but it's still early doors.
We have a roadmap and a framework, but it's always good to fine tune that, right? How do you get it? How do you make it better, faster, cheaper? So.
Yeah, indeed. So, well, thank you everybody for joining us, and we will see all of you next month.